Good afternoon, everybody. This is Rachel Storley with Giants of the Earth Heritage Center in Spring Grove, Minnesota, bringing you another exciting day of journey through the julekalender, which is our advent calendar for the month of December 2020. In these virtual times, sometimes we have to compromise, and I'm here with some fabulous women. You see below me this gal, Betty Dow. Oh my gosh, she's going to tell you all sorts of things about herself and her creative ways in this world. Down here, I have author Carol Hagen, and over here, Kari Vick. And I'm going to pass it off to Carol to talk about a new exciting book that is being featured for sale in the Giants of the Earth gift shop.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And thank you for inviting us to participate in this creators conversation. I love that you titled it that. As Rachel said, my name is Carol Hagen. I'm the author of this new book that just came out at the very end of September. It's called What's in the Rømmegrøt? There's a variety of ways of pronouncing that, or that people do pronounce that, but I just learned from Rachel that it's Rømmegrøt. So we have kind of a combination of ways of saying that. This is my first children's book. I'm so excited that Giants is carrying it. And when we get through this pandemic, I sure hope that I can come and share the book in person. This is my first book. It was an exciting adventure to work on it. And the most gratifying parts of it were working with these two women. Kari Vick is an experienced children's book illustrator, and I'm so grateful that I found her. I talked to a variety of people before finding Kari about illustrating the book. I heard it on NPR, I think, a radio program about her book, 7 Ways to Trick a Troll. And I took note of her name, and I Googled her name. I found her website. I contacted her. And I think because this book has a Nordic theme, she was really interested in it. But I'll let her tell you a little bit more about what excited her about contributing to this book. Kind of as we were finishing things up, I learned that my friend Deb Dow Scollin, she was my college roommate, and we continue our friendship. And her mom, Betty, is an experienced rose mauler. She both teaches rose mauling to others and creates many rose mauled items, from Christmas ornaments to great big trunks and everything in between. And I learned that she was just finishing up an adult coloring book with black and white rose mauled designs, her own designs. And I thought it would be really great to have a coloring page in this book too, since there's some rose mauling that is part of the illustrations. So I'll let her tell you a little bit more about that. I'm going to turn it over now to Kari to tell you a little bit more about herself.
Well, I'm up here in my studio. This is where I do all my work. It's a tiny room in my house that I have painted a bright color to keep me excited, and it's full of things that inspire me, mostly by other artists, some of which are children's book artists. And I got into the children's book, the illustration world in 2017 with the book that Carol mentioned, 7 Ways to Trick a Troll. That's through University of Minnesota Press. And I am of Norwegian heritage. And for that book, I ended up going to Norway and immersing in my own culture, which made me all the more interested. So when Carol contacted me about the Rømmegrøt book, I was thrilled. And what was fun about our initial conversations were that this is about an experience Carol had with one of her grandchildren. But she has a few grandchildren, so she can't play favorites with any of them. And so the little girl in the book at the time was named Emma. And I said, well, it's so funny that I have a great grand niece who lives in Stockholm, Sweden, and her name is Ella. And Carol said, well, let's make her Ella. And so that was a wonderful idea. I'd been worried about losing touch with my little Ella across the ocean. And so that was a way I could communicate with her was through this book. And since it was going to be Ella, then I decided to make the grandmother character, Ella's grandmother, my sister-in-law, Heather. And what was fun about that was trying to base these characters on people I actually knew. And that was a challenge, but I found it was really helpful in trying to keep that character looking the same from the beginning of the book all the way to the end. It's really helpful to base that on somebody you actually know and somebody that you actually know very well. So that was, it was a thrill to be a part of this. And again, to touch on my own heritage was double the blessing. And so as I researched things to include in the book, we wanted to put some rose mauling in there and some different Nordic type themes in the background and whatnot. Then she introduced me to Betty's work, rose mauling in general, and it was really fun to play with those themes. I'd never tried rose mauling before. I've always loved it. And now I'm continuing to fiddle around with that idea and hope to explore that a little bit more. But the real expert on rose mauling is Betty Dow here, and I will let her tell us about her artistic experience.
Thank you. I met Carol over 40 years ago when she started her freshman year at Luther College. And she was one of Deb's, my daughter's, roommate. And at that time, we lived in Decorah, Iowa. So the girls would come down for dinner on the weekend or decorating a Christmas tree or whatever. I was known as the Luther mom. And this is how I got to know Carol. And through the years, we've continued. And a year ago, I put out my first book, Strokes of Love. Carol was in one of my rose mauling classes. And I had the book. It was exactly 1 year ago this month. And I shared it. And so then she was telling me about what she was going to do. And I was so excited for her. She said, well, that, she would love to take one of the pages out of my book and use it as a coloring page in her book. And I said, let me think about that, because the designs were too large for children. And I said, I tell you what, let me design something. So I took flowers from throughout the book, little, I think there's 6 or 8 of them. I thought this would be more interesting for children, because I know that, after working with my great-grandchildren, after a few minutes, they would be gone. But to take one little flower. And so that's how that, came about. I'm very proud of you, Carol. It gives me a good feeling to see what you're doing and keep up with all the kids. And I'm very honored to be part of this book, and best of luck.
Thank you so much, Betty. I'm just going to circle back to the characters a bit, Kari. I mean, I don't know personally, but just trying to imagine creating the illustrations with these characters and having somebody in mind and how important that might be. And you had your sister-in-law in mind for the grandma character, and then also your great niece for the child character. And yet I have to say, this particular illustration, when you first showed that one to me, it just was very striking in how much that expression looks like my mother. Because as the author of the story, the grandmother character is very much a composite of both me, who I'm a grandma now. I made Rømmegrøt for my kids growing up, and now I make it for my 2 little granddaughters. But my mother made Rømmegrøt a lot for us growing up, partly because it was simple and the ingredients are very basic, and we always had those on hand. But she was a single parent. She was a widow. And so we didn't have a lot of money. And she had to work full time. And so Rømmegrøt was really a staple at our house. And so to see her face really captured in that expression, in that illustration, that's just one of my favorites. I mean, they're all my favorite, but that one in particular really captures my mom. Something that people have said whenever they see the book and experience it, everybody always mentions how great the illustrations are and how much they bring the story to life. And what I really love about it is when people see the book and read it, and yet they make it their own. A friend of mine said, "Oh my goodness, this is just like when I would make Rømmegrøt for my daughter when she was having a bad day. The little girl reminds me so much of my daughter." And we would make Rømmegrøt, and it was a comfort food for her. And then I've heard other people say that the grandma character looks like their mother or their grandmother. The child character looks like somebody they know. So that's just a really gratifying thing when you create something, but then the people that you share it with, they make it their own. And I just really have appreciated that.
Yeah, and you know, that is the challenge for the illustrator, is I have to listen very carefully to the authors to find out what their vision is, because they're my drawings, but it's the author's story. And that gratifies my illustrator's heart to hear when people can relate to the images very personally like that. Of course, these were based on these characters, but there's often I'm striving for that quote unquote every child, or every, you know, that it's loose enough that people can relate on some level and somehow, and relate to the book that way. First, I was going to say that it was interesting how much you and my sister-in-law resemble each other, because I think that the grandmother character looks a bit like you as much as it does like Heather.
Yes.
And it always blows my mind. This is not a self-compliment, but that just a few strokes of marks on a piece of paper can conjure somebody's personalities. It just blows my mind. But one of my favorite characters to work on was the cat. That was your suggestion, to have the cat in the book, and I chose a Norwegian forest cat, and I am a dog person, but after spending all those months drawing that cat, I just came to love that critter.
Living in Decorah, Rømmegrøt is something that's a staple. And rosemary and hardware embroidery and things like that. So this is absolutely perfect. When we had a Norwegian exchange student, I was making Rømmegrøt, and Carol, you probably had it at the house one time, because
I'm sure
that's one of the things that he wanted. And he always had it at Nordic Fest. So it's perfect for, you know, the area.
Yeah, and in my family, lefse is the traditional thing we make constantly. My grandmother taught me how to make lefse. So you'll notice in the dedication, I mentioned both my grandmothers who taught me how to bake and make the different Scandinavian specialties.
Rømmegrøt is what I make most out of all the Norwegian selections. And then flatbread is probably the thing I make second most. I just like the flatbread a lot.
When I lived in Decorah, rosettes were something that, you know, I was easy to make, and the Rømmegrøt.
Easy
and
to make?
After 40 years of rose mauling, you know, this was really exciting to put out my book and then turn around and be part of yours. In a time where everything is closed down, in this, you know, my book came out, and the next month, too, it was closed down. And you came out with a book the same way. So this type of video is great to expose people.
I know that adult coloring books has really become a thing in the last 5 years or so. And during a pandemic in particular, people are at home, they don't have a lot to do. And there's all kinds of evidence now about how doing anything with your hands is a great stress reliever. And then if you don't want to learn a totally new hobby like knitting or actual rose mauling, coloring images that somebody else has created, but making that your own through your own shading and color selection and everything is a really good thing to do with your hands.
This is how I started with the book, was that I was over at Deb's and my granddaughter was coloring in a coloring book. Now she works at Mayo. And I said, Ashley, is there a problem here? You're in a coloring book. And she says, Grandma, this is great. She says, Jackson is in bed. I can color and work the pictures, and it's relaxation. It's my mental health. And so I gave that a thought, and I thought, I'd like to put together something for the kids. So I was going to put together and mimeograph a few pages, and they said, no, you've got to put out a book. And they said, a coloring book. And so that's how this, happened, was through the family.
And I really wanted the children who read this book to not just hear the story, but also be able to do something action oriented. So there's at least two opportunities for them to do that with coloring. People do have permission to photocopy the coloring page for their personal use. So if they want to try different color combinations or whatever, they can do that. And then the recipe is also, or a recipe for Rømmegrøt is back, so that people can experiment with making the dish themselves and trying it out. So it's an activity book.
On the bottom of the page with the various pictures is my website. And you can go there, and Marcia has been videoing various things, painting on glass, painting on fabric. These are all free. And we decided that during this lockup, share. And so I've got 4 pages, and you can go there and read articles, and you can learn how to do strokes and things like that. And, this is what it's all about right now, is sharing and getting people, interested in this. And it's all free.
And there is absolutely no better personal mental health therapy than art, creativity of anything, maybe whether it's baking or, making something with your hand, knitting, whatever, but just the wonderful thing about art, when you're doing a children's book, you have a story and you're following a storyline. But otherwise, whenever I sit down in my studio, what I intend to do isn't always what I end up doing. It's interesting how one thing will lead you to another, or that something comes out that you had no idea was there. But there's something about mark making. And so many people say, oh, I can't draw a straight line. Well, neither can I. But I can make marks. And as long as you don't put yourself in a box, you just do whatever, just random, abstract, whatever, it will make you feel better.
One of the articles I have on my website is Art or Therapy. And I wrote this many years ago for a magazine, art magazine. And my husband, being a psychiatric social worker, worked with me for this. And it's on my website to see. And it was a couple of years ago. My granddaughter was here and she was in the living room and she looked at Don's picture and she said, I wonder what Grandpa would say now with everything that's happening. It must have been since the virus started. And I said, well, I know what he'd say. He'd say, okay, I'm coming out of retirement of social work. It's time for me to start counseling because everybody's going to need it if they don't, keep busy. So.
Yep. Indeed. A project is nothing better than a project. And book illustration is kind of fun because there's a set order of way you do things. And it's fun also to see how things change so drastically. I thought you might be interested. Like, this is when you're doing a book, first you draw the whole thing out in very miniature little sketches, and then I draw them all out, just a full-size rough sketch, and then go on to the actual pages. But they can change quite a bit. And early in the book, Grandma is bending over and trying to get all the pots and pans assembled, and it's kind of the instructions I got, or the wish list I should say, that I got from Carol, was that she wanted pots to be kind of falling all over, and maybe one of the pot lids would be gyrating on the floor as it fell. And so here's the actual sketch I did initially.
Oh.
And you can see how different. She wanted her to be kind of funny, where she'd be bending way over and trying to get on her shirt or her apron and such. So you can see that to the image then changed quite a bit. I should take that out. Changed quite a bit. Now she's kneeling and the cat is up on a chair.
Yeah.
And that, but it's kind of fun to see it evolve as the storyline goes. No, I need to put that on the left, or I need to put this on the right. And so it's from beginning to end, it changes dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And anyone can write a children's book. If you have a story, like Carol's was an actual thing that happened, just try writing it down sometime, and you'll be surprised what you can make into a children's book. It's really fun. And the fact that this one is it's a family heirloom for you now, for you and for your grandchildren, to show their grandchildren one day that this was what we did with Grandma. I think that is so meaningful.
Mm-hmm.
Family is everything.
Well, and that's why the Strokes of Love book, it was something to leave the children. And when I was working on it, they said, that's our heritage. We want you to, after 40 years of teaching, it's time for you to put all your designs in a book for us.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought, okay, 25 books. And next thing I knew, we're going through what Carol went through, the printer and things like that. And
the first time you do it, I had no idea what I was doing. You're just sort of led along by a process.
yeah,
And that even goes to the story itself. You mentioned, Kari, with creating on paper or something that you don't necessarily know what's going to come out. In some ways, that's how this story evolved. A real event happened Christmas of 2018, and I just kind of made a comment, and then I said, sounds like a children's book, just as a joke. And for the next few months, that idea just kept coming up and coming back to my mind. If I was out on a walk or just daydreaming. For a writer and an author, I think being able to daydream and let your mind just wander is really important. And that's kind of how this came together. And in some ways, it almost feels like the story just wrote itself.
that's the artist in you.
Yeah, it just comes through you rather than oh, I'm going to do this and here's step A, B, and C. It just did not play out like that at all. So.
The other thing that's very special about this book is in the publishing world, most often the author and the artist never meet, never speak, never have any communication. The publisher is in the middle for good reason, in many cases.
Sure.
To direct, and so that the author has to, with a whole lot of trust, send that hard-won manuscript, just hand it over to a publisher, and then they give up complete control. They can't pick the artist, they can't pick the style or anything. And so as an artist, for me to have such access to you so that I could make sure that I was getting it right, and I didn't get any details, that was so gratifying for me, because I wanted you to be happy. I loved the process, but it's your story. And so that's the self-publishing world, and it has changed that whole dynamic of being able to maintain a little control on the part of the author. And that was gratifying, like I say, to me.
Well, that's interesting to hear. I mean, I just can't even imagine doing it another way.
Yeah.
Because it's such a dance between the words on the page and the illustrations. They have to support the other. It's not just a story and it's not just art, it's both together. And I feel really, this is my first experience with it, but I feel like we accomplished that with what's in the Rømmegrøt. And then these bonuses of the coloring page and the recipe at the end, and making it an activity book as well as a storybook.
Right.
Icing on the cake. So
Yeah.
Cinnamon on the Rømmegrøt.
The other thing that's fun about, I think, book illustration is the time lapse, or writing a book or illustrating a book. You spend so much time with that manuscript and with those paintings, and then it goes off. It's not unusual for it to be an entire year from the time I hand off the artwork to the
Sure.
book actually arriving. And then it's all new even to me. And that's really fun. I've the other thing that's interesting is I miss my characters when I'm done with a book. I've spent so much time with them. They're a part of my life on a daily basis. And then it's just kind of done, and I miss them. And so when they come back, a year later in the form of a book, that I can look at anytime I want. It's really fun. It's really fun in that way.
Well,
you mentioned my earlier on shameless self-promotion.
Yes.
This is the 7 Ways to Trick a Troll book that I illustrated, and it started my whole children's book illustration process. So interesting that it ended up being about something on my own heritage. I'm now actually beginning illustrations for my 8th children's book. It's been a great career for somebody like me, and in these times that we're talking about, times of COVID, actually my life has changed very little. An introverted artist working alone in her home studio, who now does not have to make any excuses for why I never leave home. But to be able to work independently, I could be working anywhere. And so illustration and writing, not only for your own creative and mental health, is a wonderful career that has so much flexibility in it that you've often thought you had a children's book in you. Why not? Just try it and put it out there to the world like Carol has done, and see what happens. So anyway, my website, karivic.com. If you want to see the other books, please do visit.
Well, like she just mentioned, I can go in my studio and start working on various things, and that's my therapy. Last year, when I heard the word Zoom, I thought it was a game that the kids played. And this year I've Zoomed 5 different times. You're learning a lot. I don't care how old you are. I hope that people will enjoy the Rømmegrøt and the Strokes of Love, because it's something you can really get into and relax and enjoy, and it gives you happy feelings.
My grandmother, who lived to be 100 years old, told me, make sure you have something. She did a lot of hardanger, beautiful hardanger.
Oh, yeah.
And she said, make sure you have something in your life that you can do sitting down, whether it's crossword puzzles or knitting or anything. Because she said she noticed her friends who didn't have a practice like that in their lives, their mental acuity was not there. And she was till the very end. Again, that creativity outlet, everybody needs it. And just for long-term planning, make sure it's something you can do when you need to just sit in a chair for a while.
Right.
Well, I just want to thank both of you for participating in this Zoom event for Giants, and especially for being a part of what's in the Rømmegrøt. It's just been such an amazing adventure for me. And I love what you said about, if you have a story and you think about writing it down and thinking about putting it together as something to share with other people. It's a great learning experience. It's a way to put yourself out there in a way that you might not otherwise do. It's certainly been a wonderful experience for me. And I feel like I'm just at the beginning with just releasing this book and trying to share it with people during a pandemic. I'm kind of taking a long view. I hope to meet up with both of you again in northern Minnesota, in Harmony, in other locations, to read the book to groups of children, to share it in other ways with people. Thank you again for being part of this team.
Well, Rachel here, I'm just going to say once again, thank you so much, all of you amazing women. As I was listening to you talk off video, I was reminded of how Giants of the Earth, one of their mission statements is to record and preserve the oral history of people in this area. And what you're doing is just a few steps beyond that, but it all starts at that same place of having kinship with our families and our communities. And the fact that you were able to do that in a way that is so beneficial to your own personal legacies, but then now you're intertwined with each other's as well. And hearing how all of your connections have come together so beautifully and will continue to flourish throughout the many generations after is very much in step with what Giants of the Earth is trying to do for this community. So it's a perfect fit all the way around. And we're just blessed and happy to have your work in our gift shop and to have you here today with us and a part of our Jule Calendar 2020. So thank you so much. And how about let's all try to say God Jul to all of the people who joined us today. En, to, tre. God Jul!
God jul!
Ha det bra! Tusen tack!
Mange takk!